Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Maintaining Data Integrity and Compliance of Your Osmometer. But first, some quick housekeeping. Please feel free to submit questions that will be answered at the end of this webinar during our Q&A session using the chat box in your control panel. If you have any technical issues, please send our team a message using the chat and we'll be happy to help you resolve it. Now I would like to introduce our speaker, Shweta Nair, Senior Product Manager for our biotech portfolio of osmometers at Advanced Instruments. Shweta has been with Advanced Instruments for over 3 years, driving the GMP and data compliance of the osmometer portfolio. Prior to Advanced Instruments, Shweta was a product manager at MilliporeSigma. With over a decade of experience in the industry, Shweta will be sharing her thoughts today on the best ways to maintain data integrity of your osmometer. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Jared mentioned, I'm really going to be spending some time today discussing how to maintain data integrity and compliance in your workflows with an analytical equipment in the lab, especially something like our osmometers. So as we get started, I'm just going to go over quickly the agenda. I'll introduce a bit about the Advanced Instruments company, a little bit about us. We'll discuss what osmolality is, what's the value of osmolality, and then really go into data integrity. What does data integrity mean? What are the recognized aspects of data integrity that we need to address when we speak about maintaining data integrity? And then what is data connectivity, which is a critical piece to data integrity? And lastly, how does the OsmoTECH portfolio of osmometers really support you in ensuring that your lab and your workflow has data integrity and compliance built in? So with that, let's jump straight into learning a little bit more about Advanced Instruments. So we here at Advanced Instruments are really consider ourselves to be osmolality experts with over 60 years of experience in biopharmaceutical as well as in clinical market, really focused on freezing point depression technology as an osmolality solution. And across the last 4 years, I would say our focus has really deepened in the biopharma market, having interacted closely with our customers to really understand their pain points and customizing our devices for their needs. And one big pain point we uncovered was having an analytical osmometer that was able to really comply with data integrity and compliance needs that were evolving in the market. In addition, the Advanced Instruments family also houses the Solventum portfolio. The Solventum portfolio is a cell line development set of instruments all the way from seeding to cell imaging. So that's a little bit about us here at Advanced Instruments. And the next thing I want to talk to you about is osmolality. So some of you may be familiar with osmolality and some of you may not be. So just to set the stage, osmolality is a critical quality attribute or a critical process parameter that's used by our customers across the biopharma workflow at various stages through cell line development, process development, to formulation, or even downstream in purification as a quality check to ensure that everything is the media is being prepared correctly, the buffer is being prepared correctly, the purification is happening correctly, and so on. So osmolality at its core is really a measurement of the amount of solute in a given solvent. So you can really apply that to anything within the biopharmaceutical workflow. So a lot of our customers in the cell culture monitoring space are really looking at the osmolality of the cell culture media in the bioreactor. So are the cells really happy? Are they multiplying the best way? Is it the right optimum environment that we've created for the cells? And all the way down in formulation, as we're formulating these drugs, we're really paying attention to, is the formulation the most optimum? Is it safe? Is the osmolality at very close to where it can be delivered safely to a patient so they don't have too much of pain or are willing to stay with the medication? So as you can see here on the slide, there's a lot of different applications for osmolality testing, but this is just pure application, right? There's another layer that sits on top of this that's a regulatory impact. And that's really where today's discussion is from a data integrity perspective. If you are getting an osmometer into your lab to solve media QC needs or confirming your buffer exchange process or doing your cryopreservative, cryopreservation formulation, you still want to know if that instrument fits into your GMP environment or your GLP guidelines, etc. So a big aspect of that is data integrity, and let's jump straight into that next. So what is data integrity? We throw this word, which is very fancy now, everybody talks about it, but what exactly is it at its core? So if we say facts and statistics that are collected for reference or analysis, that is what data is, right, at its core. So it's basically raw data, metadata, gives you the real data that all of you are working with on a day-to-day basis. But what does that mean? So if we look at an osmometer giving you an osmolality value, it generally will give you a raw data of 290, okay? That's our standard control, very close to human serum osmolality. So 290 is the raw data. But 290 by itself does not mean much unless you add the units to it, or you add the sample ID, the user ID, the date and time when that sample was run, or what device this particular sample was run, because that's all of that additional information is really your metadata. And both of that, the 290 with all of that additional information, is really what gives you a comprehensive understanding of what was performed in your lab as part of that testing. So you ran a sample, who ran it, what was the sample, at what time was this run, on what device, and what was the value you got, and what were the units. So this is at the very core, just to give you an idea of what data is, and we use the term metadata for everything else that supports to really fill in the full picture of what that raw data means. And then in addition, data integrity is a layer where it really refers to the full consistent, the completeness of the consistency and the accuracy of the data, but really throughout the entire life cycle. So you generate the data, now you're going to process it, you're going to report it to your manager, you maybe even approve it and then archive it for a few years, and then you're in an audit and you need to retrieve that data, and then you have to make sure that data is still valid, and after a while, after it's reached its archival period, you then destroy it maybe. So through that entire process of years, multiple people, multiple touch points, it's very critical to make sure that that data is preserved accurately from the time it was created all the way through when it no longer is needed, right? So in that integrity process, that's a multi-fold, multi-year process, and it's also, as I just mentioned, open to so much error. So how can we ensure that everything is robustly, consistently maintained? So just to give you an idea, in 2018, one of the top reasons for FDA drug GMP warning letters was the lack of data integrity. So FDA is taking this seriously. Most of your internal organization, I'm sure, is spending time on addressing, hey, how do we make sure everything is happening and everything is controlled and there is no room for error? So when this discussion was happening about data integrity in early 2000s, 21 CFR Part 11 as a guidance was being written, one of the big acronyms that came out of this was ALCOA. So what ALCOA really stands for is attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate data. So these are some of the critical characteristics for your data integrity matrix, like to maintain your data. So what does this actually mean? So when we look at attributable, what this really means is that the record can be linked to the individual that performs the measurement, the date and time that this was taken. So really, when I get that data set, whatever that may be, whether it's HPLC data, whether it's anything, an osmometer value, a pH value, whatever it may be, whoever performed that testing, can we identify that person? Right? And can we know when this was done? Because 5 years from now, if you have to look at it, or 2 years from now, you have to look at it, you need to know all of that. So is it attributable? A unique electronic signature. So if there's a review and approve process, is that associated with these data sets? Another key thing, if you have IT people on the call who'd really enjoy this, is the fact that can we easily manage who is running these tests so we can attribute it accurately? So that's another key aspect of that data integrity process. The second is legible. So like back in the day, they say, you know, doctors would scribble and they have really bad handwriting and you can't understand what they've said, and you go to the medical shop and you have to get your drugs and you have no idea. So as a joke, I mean, so since then, like everything's electronic, you know, they type it out. There's no error in understanding what it's written. Exactly the same way, electronic records need to be human readable format. They need to be very clear, legible. Anybody should be able to understand what it is. And more, it's also the fact that it needs to be in a format that's very easy to open, review, and audit. And so a lot of times this tends to be like for electronic data sets, it tends to be like a PDF electronic data, right? So handwritten records are not good as electronic data because it tends to be, one, it doesn't tend to necessarily last very long. And that's something we've seen in the industry as well, as you know, printouts are made from devices that tend to be fading over time. You then have to scan it and store it and things of that nature. So the fact that the data set that you get have to be recorded in a way that it's legible is very, very important. The next is contemporaneous, and this can be an interesting word. What does contemporaneous mean? So contemporaneous really means that the electronic records should be created immediately when the sample is measured. So if I'm running a sample on a device at time 0, I need to, as soon as, let's say it takes 60 seconds to get a result, as soon as you have 60 seconds passed, I should immediately get a result. I can see that result on the display of the instrument, but it also needs to create a record immediately that can be accessed, right? So for instance, if you're in a lab, there's so many things happening. If an instrument shows you the value after you ran it and 60 seconds later, but you're doing something else, or your operator is busy in another lab or got distracted, and it takes them maybe 15, 20 minutes, and they come back and they see the result and they just write it down in their record of their book. Does that count? Like, what happened in that 20 minutes time frame? Like, if there's no timestamp attached to it, you don't know that that's the actual value for that sample. There could have been various other scenarios that could have caused that data set to no longer be valid, right? So contemporaneous really is making sure that there's a paper trail of exactly when that sample test was run. And when I say paper trail, I mean electronic trail of when that sample was tested, and it was an immediate data was recorded, and then there was no lag in time. And when you're manually transcribing this, there's obviously errors and things that are prone to it additionally. And the O in ALCOA stands for original. So FDA recommends that the electronic record should be the original record created when the test was completed, right? So what that means is when the test is done, there is a record that's automatically created electronically, whether it be on the instrument itself or there's a folder in your network and it sends a PDF file at the same time, something of that nature. But that's automatically done at the same time, and there's no transcription that's being done, which could result in more errors. There's no scanning of the paper. So I know a lot of labs that are going from paper-based to electronic or considering it or still in paper-based, they tend to have the receipts or the papers for the results, and then you have to scan it and make sure that's saved, because that's really what your data is, right? That's the proof that you ran the test and you got a particular value. So if that's not scanned and preserved properly, if during an audit they ask you to look at that data set, then if you can't find it, or if it's faded, if that's not there, then it's now missing, and that's obviously a concern. So having that original data, whatever that proof is, maintained, that's critical. And lastly, accurate. So when we say accurate here, we're not speaking about the accuracy and performance of the analytical device. We're really speaking here the accuracy in or the robustness with which it's able to capture all of that data electronically. So if this instrument is connected to your network, is the device able to robustly send that data electronically? If the instrument has a built-in barcode scanner, Is it able to robustly pick up on the barcodes that we're using for our samples in the lab? Because all of that ensures the accuracy with which your full data set will then be reviewed, right? Because that's your raw data, your scanning of your barcode, that's your sample ID, that's your metadata, your time and date stamp that's on the instrument, is that accurate? All of that is built into understanding accuracy of that total data set. So that's really ALCOA as a whole. But then as time has passed, there's been few other things that have been added to ALCOA, and it's sort of called ALCOA Plus. They didn't want to add too many other characters to this. And what the plus really includes is 4 other additional aspects to data integrity, or facets to data integrity. 1 is complete, 2 consistent, 3 enduring, and 4 available. Now, what complete means is that every operation, including exceptions, supervisory sign-offs, rejected batch, all of that is tracked. So now if I come back to the example I was giving you earlier, where the operator ran a test on the device, was pulled into something else, walked away from the instrument for 20 minutes. Another person in the lab walks up, sees the instruments blinking, decides to take the sample out, log in, change something, or print some data set, and then log back out. Now when the early user comes back and looks at it, we need to make sure that whatever was done by the unknown user was tracked and traced on the device, right? Because we don't know if what that person did is going to affect what this person had already done or what the next person was going to do. It could be something as simple as the other user came in and decided, okay, sample ID is no longer required for when I run my samples, but that needs to be tracked. So what's important is now that although the final data is complete, the route to getting that final data set is important. Like, is everything audited? Is there an audit trail on that device that tracks all the events? Consistent. Consistent is really something that's used across not just one site, but multiple sites. So if you have multiple instrumentation, are all records that are presented consistent, right? So if there's supposed to be this format, this specific structure to how that data is presented, the way the data is tracked, is that consistent irrespective of changes in location, in changes in regions or software changes or anything like that, right? Is the data always consistent as a whole? The next one being enduring. And enduring is something that I think everybody understands very quickly, because anything that we do it for a long term. We need to have copies for many years. So is that database with the data, is it secure? Now, if you are backing up the data to your cloud or your LIMS system and things of that nature, that's exactly the same thing, right? What's important is that LIMS system is able to securely save that data for an extended period of time. Additionally, you're not allowing somebody to go in there and make changes or delete data. If you're making changes, you want to be able to track the changes, but you never really want to delete any data because you never know when that's going to be important, and every data point on a device is critical to giving the full story, the complete story of that device. So enduring is a critical part of the data integrity. And the last piece is available. Now, available has many meanings here in the sense that the results of the device are easily available. The events or the audit trail can be easily looked and searched and reviewed on an annual basis, if that's your frequency, or biannually. Perfectly fine, that makes sense. But the other thing within available is the fact that not all data sets are just within the instrument, right? It's sometimes stored, as I mentioned earlier, in your cloud, in your LIMS system, or just a folder in your network. All of that sources all need to be easily available, but also ensure in that availability, everything else we talked about with ALCOA applies, right? So that's the availability here really talks a little bit about the data connectivity part, which is a very critical part of data integrity. They sort of go hand in hand. You have data that's fully complete, it's accurate, it's attributable, it's everything, legible, original. But if it's not easily accessible or available to review, to audit, then there is a concern there. So that's really where the ALCOA Plus comes in. So now, having painted sort of the bigger picture of what is data integrity, I really want to jump into presenting to you what the OsmoTECH portfolio does. So OsmoTECH and data integrity, how they can be partners. So what is the OsmoTECH portfolio? So the OsmoTECH portfolio is a portfolio of micro osmometers that were built specifically for the biopharma market. So really for the biotech customers who are not only looking for an osmometer that can give you consistent, accurate performance from testing of samples, the ease of use of implementing any device into a lab with, whether it's across multiple sites or multiple users, but also really taking into account the compliance regulatory nature of your lab. Now, you could be in a completely different regulatory environment in R&D, in early process development, or all the way in manufacturing. But what's important is that within the OsmoTECH portfolio of osmometers, it's very easy to customize the device to your level of regulation. So you can always ensure compliance, or always ensure that the instrument is supporting whatever compliance objectives you in your lab have. And the portfolio includes different types of instruments. So you can see here, there's 3 different osmometers here, the OsmoTECH XT, the OsmoTECH Pro, and the OsmoTECH HT. And they're different for, obviously, needs of the customer from an application perspective, the sample testing, the sample, the type of sample, the throughput of testing, but they all have 2 things in common, and that's the robust data compliance and the flexible data management. And that's really what we're going to jump into a bit more deep and connect it to the ALCOA principles that we just learned earlier. So when we look at 21 CFR Part 11 and EU GMP Annex 11, a lot of these 2 are derived, as I mentioned, from the core principles of the ALCOA Plus, right? Which are how you would describe good data integrity practices. So a key element is that building the full picture, the attributableness of your data set. So who performed the test is very important. So logins are something that's built into these devices to track with very unique user IDs and customizable passwords. Now, you may ask, why do I need a user ID and password? So within the 21 CFR Part 11 guidance, the FDA says that for a person to be identified, for a login credential, etc., for a user ID to be identified, there needs to be 2 elements. There needs to be an ID, and there needs to be a password, both syncing. So we know for a fact that if the person, in a list, if they have the ID, that's great, but only if they enter their password are we doubly making sure that it's accurate. So the instrument comes with a unique user ID and a customizable password. And what's really nice is the OsmoTECH actually allows you to connect this to your Active Directory or your LDAP. So what that is, it basically means that whatever password your operators, your users are using on their Windows, they can type in the same password on the device and easily access go into testing on the instrument. So that's one password. They don't have to, memorize multiple passwords. And the great news for you as a supervisor or an administrator is that you can easily manage the account. You can say, okay, I have 5 people in this lab. Out of the 5 of them, 3 of them are operators, 2 of them are supervisors, and I'm going to easily manage that on this particular instrument. Let's say somebody leaves the company and decides to join some other firm. You can then easily remove them from that device, all through the access of Active Directory. The second is permissions. So I used the term before when I was explaining logins, everybody can have a user ID and password on that device, but do we want everybody to have the same level of access to the data or the same ability to do changes on the instrument? Probably not, right? The people who run the test daily, we probably don't want to be able to give them the ability to change configurations like require user ID, require sample ID, because that would just make it easier and non-compliant. It would make it easier for them to do the test for sure, because it's much less questions asked, but obviously would take it away from being compliant. So here on the OsmoTECH portfolio family of instruments, you have 3 levels of user access. You have administrator, supervisor, operator. And these administrators are sort of the super user, and the rest of their access and permissions can be customized, because we know no 2 labs are the same. So if you want your supervisor to be able to calibrate in one lab, or if you don't want them to be able to do any performance of calibration, that's fine. You can customize that. Also, more and more in the industry, what we're seeing is administrators are becoming more like IT people who help in sort of setting up the device, making sure it's configured correctly, making sure it's connected to the network. But you really don't want them running a test. You really don't want them going in and performing a calibration, right? You want them to be sort of non-influential third-party people, not involved directly with the device's performance from a testing perspective. You have the ability to do that on the device by simply turning off a feature. You can disable the administrator from performing a test, but they can take care of everything else on the instrument. The next 2 things is protection of records and audit trail we talked about. So within 21 CFR, it says protection of records to enable their accurate, ready retrieval throughout the record's retention period. Now, the instrument has an unlimited data storage for the life of the device. What does that mean? It truly means that the OsmoTECH family of instruments are all closed systems, and it's able to store data set for the whole lifetime. I always get customers asking me, what does that mean, Shweta? Like unlimited, is that real? Nothing's unlimited, truly. That's true, like the data, there's a physical limit on how much data can be stored on the device, but that's like around 4 GB. And we've run about 200,000 tests. Let me repeat that number, 200,000 tests. And that just took about like 4 MB space, which means like for years, you could run that instrument, you will never hit the capacity, because the data, the raw data and the metadata on the osmometer are such small size packets that it doesn't take a huge space within the device. So you have unlimited data storage. There'll always be a copy on the device. However, we understand that you always want to back up and keep a copy, right? So the instrument allows you to do a manual, automated, or a synchronous backup of all of the data, the results, the audit trail, the configurations, anything and everything that can be stored on the device. You can back it all up to your network. And the advantage with that is, let's say there is a catastrophic day, something happens, and you really need to sort of reboot your device, then you'd be able to use this backup file and then get your system back up and running from where it was last left off. So you can do this very often. Like automatically can be done as frequently as once a day. Synchronous can be done as frequently as every 5 minutes. So you really will have the most latest version of the data set stored in your network, backed up. Now, what is audit trail? Now, audit trail is the full traceability. This is the full complete story on the device's utilization. So who, what, when, where. In case of our devices, we even have why built in. So there's complete information on anything happening on the device. Let me give you an example. Let's say I log into the instrument, I type in my user ID, my password. So as soon as that activity happens in the audit trail, it'll say Shweta, or my user ID, has logged in at this time, right? Now, if I make any change, let's say I change the logout time from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. So when I go into the audit trail, it would say that the logout time was changed by Shweta at this time from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. And then it will also say why. So the instrument is designed to ask the user making the change to give them a reason as to why you're making the change. So let's say I give a reason, I'm doing a demonstration for my customer. So I say I'm doing a demo. And now the instrument will also track that it was for a demo purpose. So now a year from now, when we look at that audit trail, it will say at this time, Shweta logged in, she changed the audit log from 5 to 10 minutes, and she did this because there was a demo involved. And then it will also tell me what time I logged out. So the whole activity, the whole story of what my experience was on that device is tracked. And that's critical. There's no loose ends there. And now what's also great on our osmometer is that really you cannot delete any data. So if any user is logging in, they can make a comment, they may be able to, depending on their access level and permissions, edit certain aspects, edit any settings, but when it comes to the data in itself, the actual test run for measuring osmolality, it cannot be edited, it cannot be modified, and it cannot be deleted. So if a user ran a sample and ran the sample and tagged it incorrectly, it would still be there memorialized in the audit trail. The only thing that user can do is provide more color, right? So they can go in, log a comment saying, error in sample ID to sample run. Correct sample ID is XYZ. So there's really no way for any action to be done on the device and for it not to be recorded so that you can look at it any other time for review. And then lastly, and I'd say probably one of the most critical aspects of 21 CFR Part 11 is electronic signature. So what electronic signature is, and I think some of you already have this, and you're probably managing this by either paper method, is where a user runs a test and you have a review and an approve process. So it's like a quality control process where you're like, a user A runs the test, but I want a user B and a supervisor C to review and approve it to make it valid and to ensure there's no errors and everything is, the I's and T's are dotted. And that process currently tends to happen either in your lab books or just manually on the printed sheet in your lab book. So with the OsmoTECH portfolio, all of this is done electronically. And what I mean is that on the device, on the instrument, the user would be requested to review the results and approve the results. Now, you may not do both. Some organizations choose to do just one, a review process versus an approve process, or just do an approve process, completely customizable to your needs. But you can do either or, and then that would be also saved in the audit trail for future. So there's a full end-to-end from performing the test to review approval, and then the only aspect here then that happens is then the data set is sent to your final resting place, which is either your LIMS system, your network folder, wherever your electronic lab notebook, wherever you're managing all of this data set. And that nicely flows into my next point, which was data connectivity. So now we spoke about what the instrument's doing from a management of data perspective, the fact that, the time, for instance, we do have synchronous time. So it connects to a network server for the time. So your time's always accurate. We track the users in and out. The other big aspect is connectivity. So we offer multiple different ways of easily getting the data from the device to your network, whether it's simply with an Ethernet cable to a folder on your network. If you have a LIMS system connecting to your LIMS system, you may have something in the middle, like a middleware, like SmartLine Data Cockpit. That's fine. We can speak to the SmartLine Data Cockpit as well with OPC UA. We have an embedded web server, so if you want to view the data from another building, from your home, as long as you're near a secure network, you can do that as well. So really connectivity, as I mentioned earlier, goes hand in hand, and that's built into the capability of the device to manage all of that data. Having said both of this, what's another critical aspect is with advanced instruments, we also help do the validation. So if you're in a GMP environment and you're bringing the instrument in-house, you're also going to have to qualify the devices, right? Perform an installation qualification, operational qualification, and especially when you bring a device into a GMP facility, a GMP environment, and it has all of these data integrity capabilities built in, you need to be able to make sure that it's been tested and validated. And so we go through this very comprehensively as part of our IQ/OQ validation. So you'll have a copy of this that will stay with the device for as long as that device is used. And obviously we do requalifications annually and things of that nature to ensure really supporting whatever your risk assessments coming along, or whatever your qualification, validation, compliance requirements are, quality requirements are in your facility. But the reality is that also, although the device is providing you with all of this, there's a lot that still needs to be done from a compliance perspective. You as an organization, all of your team members, you probably perform a risk-based validation. What if something happens? Do we have that covered? Selecting the appropriate instrument, equipment to fit into that will obviously make your risk-based validation easier. And you obviously also have to do audits, right, on the audit trail. And that's something which will also be easier based on the choosing of the right analytical device into your lab. There's also change control notices for equipments and procedures that you have to do. There's, working with your IT to qualify, validate the systems. You always have to think about the future. Technology is constantly evolving, very much like the biopharmaceutical industry and the drugs. So plan for business continuity. What happens if things change? Or for instance, for a long time, we were talking about LDAP, right? Which was the way of Active Directory, but now it's LDAP-S. Like, how do we make that more secure? There are concerns with just LDAP. Can we get that to LDAP-S? And can the vendor or can the instrument support that? Archiving regularly, right? So maybe you have an archival built into your business practices, where after a certain time the data stays within the LIMS system or within your network, it then gets archived separately and managed by so-and-so person. So as a compliance as a whole, data integrity as a whole, when we talked about it in the beginning, we said it was from the start to beginning, generation of data to all the way at the end of the life of that data set, right? So every step is important, and the equipment or the analytical device plays a critical piece in the early part and can really support your maintenance of that data set even in the future. So that's really what's most important. And the way Advanced Instruments, the way we see ourselves, is really your partner in compliance. Like our osmometer, our OsmoTECH portfolio of osmometers enable any lab at any stage in their journey to being to fully data compliancy. We really support you. We enable you to ensure that you can meet the requirements of 21 CFR Part 11 and EU Annex 11 with a lot of the features that we have built into the device, a lot of services that we provide, and really being an ally in addressing any concerns you may have, as well as working with you on how the future would look like and how we can meet those needs in the future. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us this afternoon, really giving me an opportunity to share with you what our OsmoTECH portfolio can offer in terms of being an osmolality solution, not just from a performance perspective, but also ensuring that it meets your quality data integrity and your compliance regulatory needs in your GMP environment. With that, I'm going to open up for any questions, and welcome back, Jared.
Thanks, Shweta. Looks like we have a few questions. The first question is, we are still paper-based with our osmometer. What would be the best way to transition?
Great question. I think a lot of labs are in that space, so don't feel bad. I think that's the fact that you've identified that you want to move is already a great start. I'd say as a vendor of a device like an osmometer, what we would recommend is start working with us early on in helping you transition. So just from, as your question says very broadly that you're paper-based, you may be paper-based on so many other aspects. So just within the osmometers pocket I can speak to is what we tend to do with customers is have them work with us in getting a device on site for an early part to help them transition some of that workload and paperwork and familiarize themselves with the newer devices. Because I know a lot of the samples tend to be run on the old instrument, and when you get a new device on board, the data integrity piece may be easy to fix, but the issue may be more so from getting the team ready from a performance perspective, because you need to rerun the samples, you need to do bridging studies, and you need to do all of that. So really, I'd say engage with us as your vendors, and we'd be happy to work with you in ensuring that that we can get you on site, get a device, help you with the IQ/OQ validation, and also ease some of that pain maybe if you're working with a LIMS provider or somebody in the middle that's helping you tie all of the paper-based into electronic.
Great, thanks, Shweta. Our next question. We currently do the review approve functions manually. Is this also done electronically?
Yes, great question. So we do have the review approve functions built into the devices so that you can do them all electronically. You'd have each of the users sort of log in with their user ID, their password, and then sign off with the data set. It's one of the leading reasons for our osmometers to be used because it's very easy to manage all of that and have that data set conveniently sent to your network for access in the future. And also there's no limits on how many users you can have on the device. So it could be really infinite number of users and they'll all have access that your IT can manage conveniently.
Great. Our next question is, do you require an external computer to use your instruments?
That's a great question. So our instruments are called as closed systems. So they basically have the operating system, everything built into the device. So you don't need to have a separate laptop connected to run the instrument. The advantage of that is there's a lot more security built in because of that, right? There's no risk of, far less risk of any hacking or anything of that nature. So you do not need an external laptop or a computer to run the instrument. However, if you choose to connect a computer or a laptop to the device for maybe even just storing of the data, that's perfectly possible as well.
Great, thanks, Shweta. Thank you, Shweta, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. If we did not get to your questions, we will follow up with you offline. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you after the event within 24 hours. We hope you have a great day, and once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.